Hello and welcome to Lansing's Movers and Shakers. I'm Ken Miller. Today I'm joined by 40th District State Representative David French. David, the Kansas legislature wrapped up its 22 session in May. We're recording this in early June. And for those who may not know, you decided to announce your retirement. What brought you to that decision?
First off, Ken, thank you for inviting me to come and talk again. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Even if I had wanted to go back for another 2 years, my health has started to cause me problems. I had COVID last year and still have some residual effects of that, and some other things have come up that it's not fair to the people of the 40th District to continue to try to represent them for another 2 years. I'm just not up for another campaign and another 2 years. So I'm ready to turn it over to somebody else that will be hopefully as good, if not better, than I have been for the last 4 years. My wife and I are not stepping out of the community. We love Lansing, and we're still going to be doing whatever we can to help the city here.
Oh, good. Okay. From a legislative perspective, lawmakers had a bit of a different task this past session, and that was, and I don't think 2 years ago we would have ever guessed this would have been the situation you guys were in, but how do you handle having a budget surplus for the first time really in a long time? So describe the process this year on how the House, the Senate, and the governor's office went about slicing up the pie, so to speak, and crafting a budget and how to spend that money.
Yeah, of course the big thing was we had an enormous influx of federal money, and that has, you just can't spend that kind of money. We're still trying to find ways to spend that money. But the real issue is that you know as well as I do, in 2017 the legislature decided that they raised our income taxes the highest it's ever been, and so naturally they're getting a whole lot more money, money that they can spend, but it's our money that we can't spend. So in many ways the surplus is not a good thing. It means that more money has been taken out of the taxpayer's pocket. But we've done some good things with that extra money this year. The first thing we did was we decided that we needed to pay off debt. The first thing you do when you get extra money is you try to pay off some of that debt you have so that you're not paying all that interest. And so we probably have gained hundreds of millions of dollars in savings by putting in a lot of money into paying off debt. So
Putting that money in up front so that we don't have to pay
Right.
heavily later.
Right. Try to cut some of that long-range debt off. So that's the first thing we did. We also did put in hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was over $750 million into a rainy day fund. Because we know this economy is not going to continue the way it will. Hopefully it doesn't continue the way it is, but it's going the wrong direction. And we don't know when the next recession is going to hit. So we put a lot of money into a rainy day fund just for that purpose. If something goes bad, we're not going to be going broke tomorrow.
Right.
And the other big thing we did this year was, the first thing we did was the bill that we passed for business development, large business development. Over $1 billion we put into this to attract big businesses. And we did that because we had one business that had offered to come to Kansas and invest $4 billion in the state, bring thousands of jobs to the state. But we had to invest $1 billion to entice them to come here. So we went ahead and passed that $1 billion to try to get them here. Now we haven't got them yet. There is still a competitive market, but we're in the running anyway. So, and if we don't get them, maybe we can get some other big business. So that was a good thing that we did with some of the extra money this year. The problem is still we're spending way too much money. Every year that I was in the legislature, we had another history-making budget, more spending every year, and that's kind of expected. Everything is costs more, so we're spending more money, but eventually we keep spending that kind of money. You know what's going to come back? It's going to come back to you and me with another tax increase to pay for it. So we just have to watch our spending. Even with all this extra money, you never know what's going to happen next.
So one of the higher visibility issues that seems to have been resolved is that of sports gambling, and you and I have talked about this
Right.
in the past. In your opinion, will the revenue the state receives from its share of the gambling pie be enough to offset some of the predicted problems with compulsive gambling? And there are other states that have shown us some examples of good and bad when it comes to gambling on sports. As somebody who probably learned a little bit about it as you were going through this session and probably the last couple of sessions, what's your take on this whole thing now that it seems to be a reality?
Right, and we've talked before about this. I've never been a big supporter of sports gambling. I think we need to keep gambling out of the sports arena. I think that just causes all kinds of problems. But it does bring revenue into the states that do it. And so that's the good thing. If for the people that they can now go on their cell phone and make bets on teams. They don't have to go to a casino anymore to do that. For most people, that's a good thing. But like you said, we have too many people that have gambling problems that they basically just give their money away, and it affects their lives and their families. And to me, that's the real issue. It's not probably a large percentage of gamblers, but it is a considerable thing to consider. And the fact is that you just can't. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money every year to go in to help compulsive gamblers. And it's hard to believe that we actually have to pay for, we're passing bills to increase the activity, but we're also having to increase more money to pay for those that participate in that activity. So I just think we have a lot of issues with this. Hopefully it won't be as many as that I think there is. Hopefully people will be responsible, but I just had a lot of issues with it, and I actually voted against it. I'm still not convinced that sports gambling is the thing to go. And hey, Ken, I buy my Powerball every week like everybody else. So I'm not against gambling. I just think sports and gambling is not a good thing.
Okay. All right, so CAPERS, the Public Employee Retirement System here in Kansas, it seems, and you kind of touched on some of these things earlier when we were talking about the influx of finance, but it seems to have received a shot in the arm, financially speaking. Are you satisfied with the improvements that have been made there? And for full disclosure, I mean, I am a Public Employee Retirement System. I will be a recipient when I retire, as you will.
Well, not now.
Well, but as a legislator, no?
No.
Okay.
No,
okay.
I didn't sign up for it.
Oh, okay.
I hadn't planned on making this a career in the first place.
Okay.
So
all right.
I am not going to be getting any of this money. But that's okay.
Okay.
There's a lot of good friends that are. So.
Okay. So, but from CAPER's standpoint, some of that money that maybe wasn't expected a couple of years ago has been put towards CAPERS and shoring that up even further.
I absolutely can. And as you well know, CAPERS was basically the bill payer for the state for many, many years. If we were short of money, guess where they went? They went to the CAPERS slush fund and took whatever money they needed out to balance the budget, and which was wrong, but you know, that's just the way they do business. Thankfully, the last 4 years that I've been in there, we have paid back a lot of that money. We paid back more this year, and then we, on top of that, paid off over $1 billion to pay off previous debts that CAPERS had. So that went from a very troubled fund that was on the verge of being insolvent to now a very solvent fund. So I'm very happy with what we've done with CAPERS. Probably one of the best things we've done in the 4 years I've been there.
Okay, this is probably the biggest issue in terms of media coverage that we saw throughout the legislative session, but it appears the state tax on groceries will be reduced over time to when it will eventually be eliminated. Given the current situation with inflation, though, and this is true for all goods, not just groceries, has this accomplishment been minimized to a certain extent?
Well, Ken, to me, and I think most people realize that the tax proposal that the governor came out with early, I guess late last year, it was to me, it was a political gimmick to try to appear to be returning money to the taxpayers. She had vetoed several bills in the past that we were trying to reduce the food sales tax, and she vetoed them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I don't know, it's a very political thing. It's a good thing. I'm glad we got the governor and the legislature all on the same thing, that we need to get rid of the food sales tax. It is the most regressive tax that you can have. So it needs to be reduced. So the legislature looked at her proposal of doing away with the whole thing at one time. Even with all the money we had, we felt like the paying down debt and all that was more important than trying to cut this tax right now. We didn't know what it was going to do in the long range as far as revenues go. So I think, from my own perspective, that the legislature did the right thing and phased the reduction over 3 years. The first reduction is 2.5% off the 6.5% it currently has. That will begin in January of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get another 2% the following January, and then it goes away completely in 2025, January 2025. And that's all good. I think, again, we need to get rid of that. What needs to be understood is, even if the state does away with their 6.5% food sales tax,
Mm-hmm.
you guys in the county still have
Right.
3.5%.
Right.
So it won't be no tax
Right.
unless the city and the county decide they're also going to do with it. And again, they have to look at how that's going to affect the revenues.
Right.
So at least we're getting rid of part of it, and that will help people considerably. I personally wanted to see it start next month, July.
Mm-hmm.
Have that reduction, the 2.5% next month. That amendment failed, so it's not going to happen until January. And again, I think that was a political gimmick by the Republican legislature to keep from giving the governor a win this year. So she couldn't campaign that she'd cut taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Just part of the political games in Topeka that I just despise.
And maybe that's part of the reason why you retired as well.
Well, it's one of the reasons why it's not a very enjoyable job. It's got to be done by somebody, and
Mm-hmm.
there's people that do it very well. I just personally don't like all the politics involved. So that's one reason. You're right. The other big political thing that came out of this was the governor wanted to give every taxpayer $250.
Right.
The legislature didn't even look at it. Said, no, we're not going to do that. Because again, if we gave $250, that's basically the governor trying to buy votes for $250, and we weren't going to give her a win. And so more political
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So
Mhm.
that kind of thing shouldn't happen in the legislature or at the governor level, but it does. None of that is really going to affect the current situation with the inflation the way it is,
Right.
going up 8%, whatever. People are hurting.
Mhm.
They really are, and we've got to find a way to get a handle on it. And it's really bad because of the government has put so much money into the economy that it's just overheated, and there's no long range goal, I don't think, to try to reduce that. We've got to reduce government spending. We've got to reduce government control of the economy. Free market is the way to go. We have too much government debt. I mean, it's over $30 trillion now. So all of that is affecting inflation. And unfortunately, the American taxpayers stuck right in the middle of this government whirlwind of money floating all around. So people are hurting, and government is the problem. I don't believe they are the solution.
All right, lastly, let's talk about your years in the Kansas House. You were elected in 2018, and I think you've kind of partially answered that with your last few statements, but how have things changed just in the time you've been there? Nobody saw a pandemic coming, and then the influx
Right.
of federal funding. Nobody could have seen that coming. But you've been there for the last 4 years, and you've obviously followed things before that, and you'll continue to follow things as well.
Right.
But I guess, give me your take now that you're soon to be out of the legislature, your take on what's going on in Topeka and how Kansas can hopefully fare as we move forward.
Well, Ken, it's been a very interesting experience. Most people have no idea how our government works, which is probably good in some ways, but it's really bad because the government works for us, we the people. Unfortunately, when people are not involved, government works for themselves. And so I think the biggest thing I've learned is you've got to be involved. If you're not following what's going on, then you're a victim of whatever does happen. And so you've got to be involved, no matter what your policies and your principles are. Really, government doesn't change that much with the bureaucracy that both the federal and the state have. Even with the change in parties, I don't think a lot changes, especially over the short term. I spent all 4 of my years under Governor Kelly, so I have no idea what it would have been like with a Republican governor, so I can't really compare the difference between those two. It was obvious over the 4 years I was there, the governor gained more control of the executive branch. She put more of her people in and made her decisions on certain things. So I think it caused much more, I don't know how the right word is, anyway, more adversarial relationship with the legislature. And so there was a lot of fighting going on between the executive and the legislative branch. When I went in, we gained a supermajority of Republicans in the House, which allowed us to do about whatever we wanted to do. Even if the governor didn't like it, we could have overturned her vetoes, which was, and she was still trying to figure out where she was going. So we did pretty well the first 2 years of cooperating between the governor and us, because we knew her strength and she knew our strength, and so there wasn't a whole lot of. But then 2020 hit, and the COVID pandemic and the emergency declaration by the governor, and the governor doing a lot of emergency executive orders on her own without consulting the legislature. So 2020 was the big year. The first year I was a freshman, and so I was still trying to learn what I was supposed to be doing. 2020 I started to feel more comfortable, and then everything stopped.
Right.
We were only in session a little over 60 days, and we lost the whole session. So, and then I had several legislators tell me when I came in, they'll tell you no 2 years are the same. Every year in the legislature is different. And it was true with me. The first year, again, I was a freshman trying to figure out where I was going, how to fit into the system. Second year, 2020, the COVID thing hit, and that was a totally different, we just basically lost a whole lot of stuff. 2021, everybody was coming back from COVID, the 6 foot social distancing, the mask, started getting the vaccines. So we had legislators sitting up in the visitors gallery. We couldn't put everybody on the floor and keep the 6 foot distance. Democrats were still wearing masks, and Republicans had the option of either wearing them or not wearing them. Committee meetings were completely changed from having a committee meet with visitors and people that wanted to talk to the committee. All of those went away. Committee met in the rooms by themselves. We had a lot of the committee met by Wi-Fi.
Right.
So you didn't even have to be in the committee room to be there. I had one committee that I had a representative that she didn't attend a single meeting in person, took them all by Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a whole different way of doing business that we all had to get used to.
Right.
And it was a pretty productive year, even in spite of all of those. And then this year we came back and we really did a lot of work. And I was overall very happy with what we had. Unfortunately, this year and last year, the governor vetoed the most vetoes any governor has ever done in Kansas, and we overturned a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
vetoes, the most of any legislation ever. So it was 4 years of totally different environment. So I really appreciate the honor of being able to be a representative there for 4 years, and the trust and the people of the 40th had in putting me there. I just, if I'd have been 15 years younger,
Right.
I probably would have done it longer, but it's time for me to hang it up. I had all the political office I want. I appreciate those that continue to do it. It's a job that has to be done. But it's time for me to move on, and I'm willing to step out and let someone else step in and do the job. But Ken, I want to thank you for the job you do here in Lansing to keep the community informed of the things they need to be informed of.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very important and very useful service you provide to the citizens of Lansing. So I want to thank you for all you do.
Well, David, I wanted to say, we've been talking now for the better part of 4 years, and I think one of the things you said earlier is a key, in that most people out there don't know how our government operates.
Right.
And I appreciate the fact that you've always been willing to come in and sit down and talk with us on these videos, which get out there. I mean, some people do see them, and it's an opportunity to learn from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what's going on in Topeka. We have Democrats, we have Republicans come on. It's obvious. Try to have both sides, or as many sides as need to be said. As an old journalist, I mean, that's the way I was always trained.
That's the way it ought to be.
And I appreciate the fact that you were always willing to come in. You obviously got some questions from me that maybe weren't the easiest for a Republican or yourself to answer, and I hope I would do the same to the Democrats that sat in that chair too. But the fact that you always came in and gave an honesty, I appreciate, and thank you for your service. You didn't have to do this. You were well set, I think, in you and your wife and your ways in terms of having a life for yourself. I remember you in the Citizens Academy, and
yes.
I thought to myself after we had gotten to know each other during that, this guy's going to run for office. There's a good chance he's going to, didn't know where it was going to be at that time, but I think, that's something you probably were mulling over at the time.
No, Ken, it was never my intentions to run for public office. I've always been interested in politics, but I've never been interested in running for office.
Mm-hmm.
I only did it not because I wanted to, because I felt like I had to.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get anybody else to run. I won't go into the politics, but I couldn't get anybody else to run against our incumbent, and I just felt like we had to have a change in our representation. So I jumped in. Probably should have thought about it longer, but I jumped in, and again, it's been a rewarding experience. I will say that without a doubt. And I know so much more about the state government than I ever wanted to know, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully I can use that information to help the citizens of Lansing continue to be aware of what's going on in their government, because they need to be.
Okay. All right. I've been speaking with 40th District State Representative David French for Movers and Shakers. I'm Ken Miller.